Hi, welcome to the Poetry Vlog. Today we have guest Ananya. Ananya, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Ananya. I'm a fourth year student at UW, studying gender, women, sexuality studies, and comparative history of ideas with minors in anthropology and diversity.
And what else do you do on campus, actually? Let's just go there and let everyone know how wildly busy you are, because you're always active in campus life.
I'm also director of the Queer Student Commission, which is part of student government. And outside of school, I do poetry and I'm a performance artist.
We met when I was teaching a CHID course. I don't remember what I titled the course.
It was
Theory
Schmeary,
which is
poetic something.
Every course I teach is some variation on activism poetics now. Yeah, and you were just a really great poet and really talented.
Thanks.
Yeah, and it was also exciting to have folks in an undergrad class interested in theory, because a lot of people are like, I can't get through it at all, much less like dig into it. So thanks for making the time.
Yeah, of course.
Why don't we start by talking a little bit about the books that you brought today?
Sure. Okay, I brought If They Come For Us by Fatimah Asghar and Quilting the Black-Eyed Pea by Nikki Giovanni.
Cool. And we were earlier talking about how we're going to do this today, and I'm like, why don't we actually start with the poems first?
Sure.
Okay, so if you want to pick a couple poems and read them, and as we go through each one, we'll maybe start there as a talking point.
Okay.
And if you have any context to offer the viewers and listeners on Fatimah and Nikki, what would you tell them?
I think I would say... So I've loved Fatimah Asghar for a long time. I think she's really amazing.
Yeah.
And also just other South Asian queer poets are always really exciting for me. So I was really excited for this book to come out. And then I fell in love with Nikki Giovanni this summer. I spent the summer in the Bay and was very much like on my own and like missing community a lot. And I read way more than I have in a long time. And I listened to one of her books on audiobook.
Oh, which book is available as an audiobook?
I think it was called like something about laughing and crying, and it was like love poems.
Okay.
But it was love poems, but it was also like got political and other stuff. And it was cool to listen to on audiobook, because I think there's something really special about like listening to a poet read their own poems, because it was read by her.
So Nikki reads it herself.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And it was cool too, because she would give context for the poems, and it very much sounded like she was just talking off the cuff, like it wasn't part of the book. And she would just go off and tell these stories like behind the poems.
I didn't even know this existed in the world. So basically it's an audio poetry book where the poet like reads their own poems and talks about the poems.
It was like a podcast.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's like actually amazing.
Yeah.
Very, very cool.
I got really into audiobooks this summer.
Yeah. Sure. All right, so let's go ahead and dive in.
Sounds good.
Which one do you want to read from first?
This one's a bit lighter, so I think I'm going to read this
Okay.
first. This poem's called Swinging on a Rainbow. The only disadvantage of air conditioning is that it's no longer possible to go to the local library and listen to the birds sing. I don't want you all to think that I am an old fogey, which since I am old, the only real question would be foginess. But I think there are things missing when you can't hear birds sing. I also like the rustle of the leaves in the fall, and the almost quiet except for someone turning the newspaper page in the big reading room of the library I grew up in. So I guess what I'm saying is that a lot of reading is done by hearing and listening. And it goes without saying by smell. Never is there a book so wonderful as the one which recalls gingerbread smells, or yeast smells, or sometimes soup in the kettle just a bit below bubbling, making winter one of the favorite times, since you get soup and cheese bread and popcorn. And I try to let my books talk about the past, hope for the future, and always remember that human beings are just one part of the chain. And since we're all swinging on the rainbow, it would be good to hold on.
Nice. You read that really well, actually.
Thanks.
Yeah. So what draws you to this poem? What do you love about it? You selected it a while ago to read. We've rescheduled many times. but I also love this poem. What are your thoughts?
Okay, so the place that I lived in Berkeley this summer was right across the street from this bookstore called Pegasus Books. Have you been there?
Yeah.
It's this really beautiful, like, blue building. And so I remember, like, the first night that I moved in, I was like, I have to go there. And then like I said, it very much, like, I was kind of sad all summer. And so that I kind of went there every time I was sad and they had a really beautiful zine section.
Okay.
And I would just look through the zines and I would just sit there for hours on the floor and just read every single one.
Yeah.
And I found this one, and it was like when they publish small versions of books to hand out to people before the book is actually published.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what those are called. Like advanced readers' copies, but not the entire book.
They're kind of like chapbooks of the book.
Like a sampler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. And I found one, and it was signed by Nikki Giovanni, which was cool.
Oh, yeah. It's cool.
And the first poem was this one. And I just read it, and it really stuck with me. And I think part of it is that, like, I grew up going to the library a lot. And, like, that image was really beautiful. And then the part about reading being done by hearing and listening and smell, like, I thought that was really beautiful. Mm-hmm. And then I just thought the rainbow thing was really cute. Like,
it is really cute.
I didn't even notice that it was called Swinging on a Rainbow until the end. And then I was like, oh, that's really cute.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of precious.
Yeah.
But it's Nikki Giovanni, so she gets away with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's fun because, like, oftentimes when folks pick poems they love, they don't pick poems that make them happier, per se.
Yeah.
So I think that, like, something that Nikki Giovanni's particularly good at is actually creating that feeling of, like, hope and possibility.
Yeah.
Which then makes you feel like, okay, I can do something now, as opposed to feeling kind of, like, stuck or mired in it.
And it's not like everything she writes about is happy or, like, uplifting.
Right.
Like, she talks about heavy stuff in her work. Mm-hmm. But, like, does it in a really wonderful way.
She does it in a really heartening way.
Yeah.
That isn't, like, sugarcoating it to make you feel like things aren't so bad, but isn't, like, happy just to be happy. But there's, like, this sort of lilt to it that lets you know, like, there's these options. Like, there's things we can do. Mm-hmm. Part of what I like about this poem, and this is, like, my bias as a multimodal writing instructor, right, is this, like, emphasis that I've been thinking about a lot lately of, like, hearing, seeing, smelling, experiencing poetry instead of it always being, like, on the page.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, like, you're listening to the audiobook by her, because I'm like, oh, that's so appropriate, you know? And in some ways it removes poetry or reading or experiences from being in that, like, weird print industry cycle.
Because that's not, I don't know, and as a performance artist, like, I don't think that's not the best way to, like, engage with poetry all the time.
All right, so say more about that, because I know we agree on it.
Yeah.
But why?
I think that, like, there's something that comes out in performance that you can't get from the page. It's like the same reason why I thought listening to an audiobook by the author was an experience in itself. Like, but, like, being there, first of all, you're, like, in a room. Everyone is there to experience poetry and, like, experience art. And I feel like spoken word has, like, a history in, like, communities of color. Yeah. For sure. And, like, the whole, like, snapping or, like, stomping your feet, like, making noise is part of that conversation. Yeah. And I always say this when I am, like, doing my introduction for performance. I, like, tell people, like, okay, you can snap, you can say words, you can stomp your feet, blah, blah, blah. And I always tell them, like, poetry is something I do for a community to have conversation. And that doesn't mean, like, you need to come up to me afterwards and be like, here's what I thought of your poem, which, like, you could, but it's, like, in the moment of me reading it, like, I'm experiencing reading it and you're experiencing hearing it. Yeah. And, like, that's part of, like, that's conversation. Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of like a more, like, I always mix up kinetic and kinesthetic, but, like, kinesthetic, I think, conversation, because speaking and performing and sharing air with someone else and, like, you know, your body sweat is evaporating in the same space. Like, there is a very, like, physical conversation happening. And the minute you start trying to, like, there's nothing wrong with analysis. Obviously, I do analysis. But sometimes poetry is at its most powerful when it resists that explanation. Mm-hmm. And so I think there can be, like, a sort of relaxation and excitement at the exact same time when you realize you don't have to analyze it or get it. You just have to, like, be there.
And, like, at a certain point, like, the snapping becomes like unconscious. Like, you hear, like, you feel something in your body. Like, it's very, like, embodied, and, like, it's not like I'm like, oh, I need to remember to snap. It's I'm snapping because, like this poem is hitting me.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep. Or like the foot taps or stomping, the leg taps.
Yeah.
The like, you know?
Yeah.
And also if you think about like the history of printing, so that's why I'm also like curious with this poem, because for so long, literature proper was only considered printed poems, which really was just code for like propertied white male.
Yeah, like people who have access to be able to like print their work or even like write down their work. Like so much of this is based in like oral tradition of storytelling.
Yep. Oral and like or visual transcription in some other form than like English language.
Yeah.
You know? So it also kind of opens up the door to like other ways of experiencing and communicating in the world.
Yeah.
Which is like exciting. So there's like a gentle call out in the poem that's also like, but look at what that opens. Like, yeah, it's exciting to me. And then did you want to read any other Nikki Giovanni ones, or do you want to move on to Fatimah?
That's the only one I picked out from this book, so we can move on.
Okay, cool. Let's move on.
Cool. This is a completely different tone.
Yes.
But
needed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is from her book called If They Come For Us. And this is the poem that kind of... There's a poem before this, but I feel like this really sets it up. And it's about the partition between, like, when India became India and Pakistan. So yeah, it's called Partition. You're Kashmiri until they burn your home. Take your orchards, stake a different flag, until no one remembers the road that brings you back. You're Indian until they draw a border through Punjab, until the British captains spit baki as they sip your chai. Add so much foam you can't taste home. You're Saraki until your mouth fills with English. You're Pakistani until your classmates ask what that is, then you're Indian again, or some kind of Spanish. You speak a language until you don't, until you only recognize it between your auntie's lips. Your father was fluent in 4 languages. You're illiterate in the tongues of your father. Your grandfather wrote Persian poetry on glasses, maybe. You can't remember. You made it up. Someone lied. You're a daughter until they bury your mother, until you're not invited to your father's funeral. You're a virgin until you get too drunk. You're Muslim until you're not a virgin. You're Pakistani until they start throwing acid. You're Muslim until it's too dangerous. You're safe until you're alone. You're American until the towers fall, until there's a border on your back.
It's like pretty much the opening poem.
Yeah.
Why don't you talk a little bit about it? So, like, what about it, like, you know, slammed into you, so to speak?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, partition is like a very traumatic part of like South Asian identity, I would say for sure. And like there's people who are Pakistani and people who are Indian, but like really there's no difference in terms, like if you were to look at me and you would look, and if you were to look at a Pakistani person, like we would look South Asian.
Yeah.
You know? But it was very much like Hindus from the Pakistan area like had to move to like what became India, and people who were Muslim had to move from India to Pakistan, and like along the way like millions of people died, and it was really violent. So I think like part of it is just bringing in like that history of violence and like starting with like, here's my trauma, I'm gonna lay it out for you. You know, because people, I don't know, I think she's like, it's very unapologetic, and I think that's really important in poetry.
Yes.
But it's another one of those poems that seems like it should be performed.
Yes. I agree, because there's a sort of like stacking up.
Yeah.
And actually I have some thoughts. I'm bookmarking it out loud for myself so I remember about prose. But there's a sort of like compiling effect.
Yeah.
It's like you're this until this, until this, until... And there's a sort of unbearableness by the time you get to the end that she's creating for you as like a... This is unbearable, or difficult enough to bear, right? I'm curious how it feels for you when you get to the point at the end where you're American until the two towers, you know what I mean?
Well, like I said, like this poem I think is really laying out trauma, and it's talking about like histories of trauma and like lineages of trauma from like ancestors and like family. But then it's also talking about trauma that like exists here, that like 9/11 was a point of trauma for like primarily Muslims, but also like anyone who could be considered Muslim. Yeah. Like I remember when 9/11 happened, my mom like told my dad to shave his beard because he would like like get stopped and like thought of as a terrorist. And like, yeah, 9/11 is very much like, obviously Islamophobia has always been a thing, but I think it was a real like catalyst to, yeah. And so I think this poem really beautifully like walks you through South Asian trauma.
Something that I also appreciate about it that really it gets to the heart of is I think sometimes we think about trauma as like the most immediate. But it's really calling out how one trauma in one soil can actually be built on and be extending previous and coexisting traumas. You know? So I think there's a way that sometimes like white folks who are like US born can romanticize like understanding and feeling sad for trauma elsewhere. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, like that happened there. Can go into Spivak again. Right? Like the phrase is like white men saving brown women from brown men or whatever, right? There's this weird sort of like, oh, that happened and I feel sad that happened there. And what I think this poem, part of it does so well is like call out a little bit. And also like explicate that how that one moment of trauma like 9/11 and the trauma that has been continuously inflicted for brown folks predominantly, right? Who look even vaguely Middle Eastern or South Asian, right? It's sort of calling that out as like, but it was complicit then and part of these other traumas, which were also colonial. Like the partition didn't happen like without colonialism.
No, it was 100% because of British colonialism. Exactly.
So for the audience's benefit, right, give a quick however you want to do it, explanation of why it's because of British colonialism.
Oh, basically like when India became like independent or whatever, that's when like the partition happened.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. But there's this sort of like constant way of saying like you don't get to see this pain and think of it as other than and like apart from your daily living. You know, I think that's something that her poems do particularly well without recentering then the white person who would be reading it. I want to talk a bit about how it's in prose form. Can we talk about your poem a little bit too?
Yeah, sure.
So people should see that it's a prose block, right? It's something that Ananya and I were talking about before we started was like, oh, you know, you've been moving in a sort of prosy direction with your poems. And I was like, well, what's keeping you from making it a prose block? So, and you were like, oh. So I'm going to ask you again, and you can still say, I don't know, but we'll just talk through it a bit. Because I think this is like the big question that no one wants to ask poets. Is like,
why don't you just do prose?
Yeah, kind of. Like, what is the point of a line break? Or when do you break lines? Like, what, when is it a prose block as a poem? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like I have been really shy to call myself a prose writer. Like, I don't think I identify as a prose writer. I identify as a poet. And so that's probably what's stopping me from doing that. Like,
interesting. So you think that, like, if you get rid of the line breaks, it's somehow compromising this, like...
I feel like then it's not a poem, which isn't true. But I feel like that's what the world is telling me. Is that, like, if it's not, if it doesn't look like this, it's not a poem.
Yeah, or if it doesn't move around on the page in some creative way.
And I mean, there's like beautiful elements to doing that. But I think when I was a lot younger writing poems, I did a lot of line breaks and spacing. And then I like realized that all of that didn't actually mean anything. I don't know.
So this is why it's curious to me. I see this a lot. And I'm like, you know, you don't have to have a line break. Like there's times when the line breaks serve you. Like the poem I read of my own, like every line break is like painfully thought out, you know? But if you're breaking a line just to make it a poem, then it's skipping the point of why poems have line breaks.
And I feel like, so I always handwrite all of my poems and then transcribe them to typing.
I do too, actually.
And for a long time, the poem would take the shape of the page. If that makes sense?
Yep, same.
So, like, I would be writing, and then you get to the end of the page, and so then you have to go down, and that's the line break. But I think what I'm realizing is that that's not always necessary. I don't know. I think also my journey from, like, poetry to prose or whatever very, like, maybe started this summer. And I think part of it is because I was doing a lot of journaling, and I just noticed that a lot of the journaling that I was doing was not like stream of consciousness, but still had like some poetic element to it.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait, but I'm writing a poem, I think.
Yeah.
Or like, this is something that I would perform.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, it's a poem. I guess maybe the problem is people don't perform prose, but they do. I don't know.
They do. Yeah. So a couple thoughts. Like, nobody really agrees on when and why you break lines if it's not in a particular form, right? Like, for not the purpose of rhyme or rhythm.
Yeah.
Everyone has their own opinion. The favorite one I heard is that there's a sort of emphasis in the breath. Like, so, let me look at a lineated poem. Let's go back to Giovanni's, for instance, right? And you still have a bookmark. That's a cute bookmark. It's a really cute polar bear otter situation. Like, oh, it's perfect with the rainbow. Right in the middle of the poem, and I'll have it come up on the screen, right? We have hearing and listening, and it goes without saying by smell. So a couple things are happening there, right? We have like the end stop of hearing and listening. The end stop is the period at the end of listening. In the middle of the line, there's a sort of pause after hearing. And before that, there are these really long lines. So there's this distillation down to the senses of just listening and hearing, right? And a sort of like forced pause by the end stop.
And there's something about like the emphasis that that brings.
Oh,
I've definitely
absolutely.
like written poems where I remember I wrote this one poem where like I wanted the line to look like it was saying one thing, but then the next line was making it say another thing.
That's the other way it's used. So and it goes without saying. When saying is the last word of the line after hearing and listening, it seems like it's a perfectly like 3-part triptych gerund being ing words, right? Like, now we've completed it. And somehow speaking is it, which goes in with listening and hearing. But then when there's the break into by smell, period, it sort of tricks you for a second. So that you have to think about what it means to say it goes without saying by smell. You know? So that's when a line break is doing something. If there wasn't a line break there, you wouldn't read the saying by smell the same way. And suddenly just the phrase, like, saying by smell is kind of interesting. And it sort of,
it, like, brings the emphasis to that because it's not like anyone would think of poetry as something you smell.
Exactly.
And so, because, like, poetry is something we hear, it's something we listen. But smell is, like, a new sense to bring into it.
Exactly. And then it starts to draw back out with the energy, and then it condenses again, right? So that's an example of like an intentional line break. Let's look at the prose block poem, and then we're going to look at your poem. I'm not going to like on the thing be like, here's where you could or couldn't break lines, but we'll talk about like the sort of possibility of what prose would offer it or line break, because it would be a choice at that point in revision strategy. So let's look. So if you look at something like you're Kashmiri until they burn your home, take your orchard, stake a different flag, and you look at how it keeps going until the part that like would make it seem like someone would be like, why is this a poem? And I'm the kind of writer deconstructionist who'd be like, everything's a poem.
Exactly.
So that's the real point. But if we're gonna like be that person to like play devil's advocate, we would say poetry is when you're paying hyper attention to what the language produces. Right? So the sort of like insistent repetition, the refusal to use like perfectly grammatically correct sentences, the sort of like building, but it needs to be compressed to do that. We could say that's the line break there, is that it's overwhelming.
And I feel like that's indicative of the subject of the poem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
More simply, I think of line breaks as like when it opens it up to possible meanings that the line wouldn't have without the break. We should get all Fred Moten on it, but I'm not going to do that to everyone. All right, I don't want us to knock it to your poems.
Okay.
So why don't we do Mango?
Okay, sounds good.
And go ahead and read it.
Okay.
And then we'll like really quickly gloss over, if you want, what would happen if it were prose, what would happen if it were more like explicitly lineated versus lineated for the sake of people calling it a poem for you.
Sure.
You know?
Should I explain context or should I just go into
It's
it?
totally up to you.
Okay. Well, like I said, I handwrite all my poems, and this journal is the one that I bought to take with me to the Bay this summer, and it's the first poem that I wrote my, like, first weekend there. I was subletting this apartment that was, like, 4 people sharing a 1-bedroom apartment. Like,
that's my personal nightmare. Like, I need my space.
Paying the same amount of rent that I pay in Seattle to share a room.
No.
Housing in the Bay is wild.
Yeah, that's why I know I won't end up there. Like, it's too expensive.
It's bad.
Yeah.
feeling a lot of feelings. Like I said, yeah, it was very like feelingsy in my trauma type of summer, and I was eating this mango because I was really excited about the fruit in the day because California fruit is great, and I got a mango for the first time, and I was like eating it for the first time and like couldn't remember the last time I ate a mango, and like eating the mango itself like was a very visceral experience, which you'll get from the poem, but then it like conjured up a lot of things too. So anyway, it's called Mango. The sun is so hot, the tables and chairs are steaming. The sidewalk is too hot for ants to walk across. Bike tires could melt as I ride the back of a rickshaw. But right now, all that matters is the sun I'm holding in my hands. Its rays falling through my fingertips, juice dribbles down my chin and seeps from hands to my elbows. My wide grin is missing a few teeth, but not to worry. The fruit's fibers are caught between all the rest of them. I slurp every slice, the peels stack up on my plate until all that's left is the pit. I meticulously scrape every last bit of the fruit Hanuman wanted so badly he devoured the entire sun. My tongue runs over my teeth and giggles escape when I feel the funny texture of fibers. There's mango juice on my nose somehow, maybe at my cheeks or my forehead too. I'm giggling for no reason, simply the delight of having a hot Indian summer afternoon quenched by a mango, if only for one beautiful saccharine moment. These mango moments made trips to India almost worth it. Almost. India was always confusing, but in these afternoons I had my daddy all to myself, I thought. Me and you and mangoes, do you remember that? I tried not to think about the in-between parts, no, because mangoes had this special sort of magic. They could let you escape into one glittering, dribbling moment outside of yourself. Maybe that's why Indians love their mangoes so much. I'm having a new sort of mango moment now, sitting in a new temporary home, with new temporary people, in a new temporary place. I forgot how to cut a mango properly, and so a mess of irregular peels lie before me on my plate. The sweet flavor still lingers on my tongue, the juice dribbles off my chin, rolls to my elbows. My tongue flicks over my teeth, and I feel the fibers, a feeling I hadn't felt in a long time, a feeling I forgot accompanied mangoes. I had nearly forgotten mangoes, and I had nearly forgotten my father. I forgot about mangoes and full-bellied laughter. I want to forget you, Daddy, I think to myself. I'm a statue made of stone with a plate of mango peels left before me, as if my devotees left them as offerings in exchange for my blessings. But the blessings, along with laughter, have run out.
Awesome. I love this poem. When Ananya emailed it to me and I was reading through them to offer like some feedback where I could, I didn't turn off notifications. I'm just going to own it.
That's okay.
High resist spot. All right. I was reading and rereading it being like, I couldn't put my finger on. I'm like, I don't know why the line breaks are here all the time.
Yeah.
And it's not a bad thing necessarily.
Yeah.
It was more like, I'm curious about what if you did get rid of the line breaks? Yeah. What if you let it be? And I'm glad that you read Partition because I'm like, this is part of it.
Yeah.
So the poem, you know, the syntax starts drawing out more and more and more. We start with these shorter sentences and it builds and builds and builds. It comes to compiling. It breaks in the middle with a sort of confusion and it comes back to building. And ironically, you run out of breath when everything else runs out. So it reminds me of that need to compress.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, because there's a sort of like jumbling up in a productive way. Like it gets, you're so visceral. You know what I mean? You're like in it with you. And you're sort of building it up until you have no more. So prose-wise, I could see it working quite well, actually, as a prose block. I'd be curious about if you played with it and tried, like, Justified or tried, right?
Yeah.
If you were to want to lineate it more, what would you do? Like, if you want to keep it lineated, what are ways that you, like, were reading it where you're like, I feel like I need a line break here?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's interesting because when I was writing it, I wasn't like I said, I'm not sure if I was in the headspace where I was like, I'm writing a poem, or if I was just writing my thoughts. Because, like, I was eating this mango and I just, like, was having so much come up. It was, like, the only way to process it was to write something. And this just came out. And then I was like, this isn't just like any old journal entry. This is like
this poem
written in a certain way. And so I think as I was writing it, I wasn't thinking about line breaks or like, but there's also certain parts where I just naturally like started a new line. Mm-hmm. So I don't know.
I know you're really busy this quarter, but I'd love to keep talking more. I'd be curious in seeing you play around with the form on it.
Yeah.
And like play around. Like you might end up lineating it, but in lineating it, you might do less explaining.
Yeah.
Like sometimes line breaks force you to stop doing the so's and ands and therefores.
I think a lot of times when I've like written a poem and then gone back, I end up just removing a lot of words. Like,
yeah.
I think that's the feedback that I've heard from you a lot that I've taken to like
sorry.
That like really good feedback because when you're just writing, you're not thinking about those things.
Yeah. I have a similar tick. I think that it is an extraordinarily visceral poem, and maybe use like Partition as like a sort of inspiration of like a prose block poem that's doing it as that. Like it doesn't, the line breaks would hinder that. Mm-hmm. You know,
I think I very much see the two in conversation.
I do too. That's why I was so glad when you read Partition. I was like, yes, this will be so easy to explain now.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm very excited by it. I thought it was an interesting turn because it felt more like you were owning some of your prosy sides, and it gives you more room to figure out what you want to make prosy or not.
Yeah.
And I just want to emphasize that like turning into a prose block doesn't make it more prosy necessarily.
Yeah.
Sometimes it'll actually highlight for you what to get rid of even more.
Yeah.
You know, personal experience.
I know. Now I feel like I need to spend like some time with this.
I think you should. I love it. I think it's good as it is now, perfectly. But I think that like there's more feeling to have in it. Mm-hmm. Like there's more for you to feel through it and playing with the form. Yeah. All right. We're so out of time. Okay. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you so much for bringing 2 books and being such a like generous reader and participant, and for putting your own writing out there to talk about.
Yeah.
Because I could talk endlessly about what happens on a page, as I do. This dissertation, right? So it was really exciting, and excited to touch on multimodality without even like knowing that was where we were going. Yeah. So it was really great and really fun. And Ananya will be back and we'll talk about performance a lot more. Good. And for the rest of the vlog stuff, I'm trying to make my exit shorter. So everything's down in the description, but basically chelseagrimmer.com has like all of the links to all of the things: podcast, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and this. So you can always hit me up there. Never hesitate to reach out if you want to be on the vlog, or if you want to read a poem in the flash briefings, or want me to read something for you, or if there's a topic that you want me to bring up for you. All right. Thank you so much. Thanks, Ananya.
Yeah.
All right. Bye. As opposed to, let's look at one with line breaks.
Okay, sounds good. This isn't one I've read yet.
Okay.
For Peshawar. December 16th, 2014. Before attacking schools in Pakistan, the Taliban sends kafan, a white cloth that marks Muslim burials, as a form of psychological terror. From the moment our babies are born, are we meant to lower them into the ground? To dress them in white, they send flowers before guns, thorns plucked from stem. Every year I manage to live on this earth. I collect more questions than answers. In my dreams, the children are still alive at school. In my dreams, they still play.
So let's hesitate over the second couplet, unrhymed couplet, blah, 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 whatever. All right. So to dress them in white, they send flowers. So for a minute, there's this like, okay, to dress them in white almost reads as a sentence, except there's a question mark. And then you're forced to pause, and then they send flowers. Seems like, okay, something positive's going to happen. But then the line break before guns recreates the before guns. Yeah. Right? You need that line break there to think about that for a second.
Yeah.
And then we have another comma, thorns plucked from stem. And we have the and stop again, right? Mm-hmm. So this is an example where not just the line breaks, but the mid-line pauses are creating the very thing that's being described.